I got married to my childhood sweetheart. On the same day, his brother married his childhood sweetheart. The two sons of a Texas wealthy tycoon were holding weddings simultaneously, creating a sensational scene in the city. The grandeur of the weddings was unforgettable. My wedding gown was custom-made, with a veil length of 10 meters. We had the wedding at the estate following Grandpa's suggestion. After the ceremony, as we drank to each other, I was escorted back to the room feeling feverish and gradually losing consciousness, only remembering the intimate moments of the night. The next day of our honeymoon, I woke up in Steve's embrace, expecting to hear sweet words from him. However, to my shock, the handsome face in front of me was Eric's. Startled, I fell off the bed. Feeling embarrassed, I covered myself with the blanket as Eric hurriedly got dressed, displaying a departure from his usual calm demeanor. I felt a mix of embarrassment and helplessness as I realized the situation of waking up in the wrong room with Steve's brother. How could this happen? It was like a melodramatic plot from a novel that I couldn't imagine writing. Feeling sorry for Eric, I couldn't fathom how it all went wrong. Eric, sensing that we couldn't talk things out, left with a brief statement. My mind was in disarray, but amidst my tears, a sudden clarity struck me. Who made this mistake? Who wanted to make this mistake? Reflecting on the events, I started to calm down. I freshened up and changed into some new clothes in the dressing room. I was smaller in size compared to Linda, so the clothes were a bit loose on me, hiding any evidence of last night's events. With a plain face, I headed downstairs. In the living room, Linda was crying in Eric's mother's arms, Steve and Eric looking at her with concern. The situation was chaotic, with Eric's mother displaying a sense of helplessness. Meanwhile, Eric's father and grandpa were clearly upset by the absurdity of it all. Amidst the commotion, Linda abruptly pushed Steve away, hitting her head on a pillar before collapsing. The family rushed to take her to the hospital, leaving me standing alone, forgotten on what was supposed to be the joyful second day of my marriage. I wasn't sure how long I stood there, nor when I lost consciousness, but when I woke up, I found myself in Eric's room again. Feeling hopeless, I was on the verge of giving up until Eric's voice broke through, offering comfort in my despair. All these years of feelings, and this was all I received, care from him when I felt most despondent, not from the one I yearned for. A surge of bitterness flooded my heart, contemplating a drastic end with them. Don't be like this? I laughed, my voice rising from low to high. Is it my fault to enter the wrong room on our wedding night? Am I not wronged? I haven't done much, but Linda went to seek death. What else can I dare to do? What else can I do? I pounded the bed vigorously, releasing my frustrations. Suddenly, a warm and large hand tightly grasped my fist. Let go of me. Immediately, I was enveloped in a strong embrace, with a solid chest pressed against my face, breathing the scent of minty alcohol. Don't be like this, you still have me. Those words struck a chord in me. I was angry, resentful, and aggrieved. I bit hard onto Eric's shoulder, fiercely, until I tasted the metallic taste of blood, then suppressed my tears and cried. I didn't know how long I cried, but I passed out again, and when I woke up, everything around me was gloomy. I was embraced, in the most reliant position, leaning against his chest. Whether it was the warmth of the embrace or my exhaustion, I simply didn't want to leave. Awake? I made some porridge in the kitchen. You haven't eaten all day, let me go get it for you to drink, okay? Eric stroked my hair, got up and left. When he came back, he helped me sit up in bed, and I obediently cooperated as he fed me. I drank, sip by sip. Finishing the whole bowl of porridge. Before Eric told me about Grandpa Song's decision, I already knew it was a done deal. But hearing it with my own ears still made me very sad. Despair overwhelmed me. I felt like a living dead these days, lying in bed all day. Eric fed me whatever he could, and the rest of the time I just stared into space. Eric's mother came to see me twice. She also knew that words were of no use at this moment, so she sat quietly with me for a while before leaving. Days later, Eric was not around, and Steve came over. When Steve entered the room, I was staring blankly at the ceiling. At first, I thought it was Eric, but when I realized it was Steve, my breath caught, and my gaze fixated on his face, I knew I should hate him. He let me invest my true feelings like a fool and then trampled on them. If I had any self-respect left, I should ignore him, tell him to get lost, and never see him again. Unfortunately, what I understood in my mind was different from reality. After all these years of emotions, how could I just take it back? When love becomes a habit, my words and actions are no longer under my control. He looked at me with tenderness in his eyes, tinged with a hint of pity. Kellen, don't be like this, it breaks my heart. Breaks your heart? It reminded me of the way he looked at me that day. That scene almost became a recurring dream for me. He stayed by my side without saying a word, holding my hand to comfort me. Kellen, I don't want this either, but it has come to this point. The Whites have a strong presence in Texas, and they won't let us be together. After days of dry tears, tears began flowing again. Steve gently wiped them away and resumed being the gentle young man I remembered. He slowly lowered his head and whispered, "Kellen, you know what kind of life I've had these years. Now, the Whites won't help me, I can't afford to offend Linda's family, and we can't be together now. When I have the Whites under control, we can be together again, right? You'll help me, won't you?" Seeing my tears increasing, he wiped them away again, asking softly, "Kellen, I love you. Do you want to marry me?" Under his gaze, I nodded. He smiled gently, leaned down to kiss me. At that moment, I felt a wave of nausea and turned my face away. He didn't mind, smiled, and said many loving words to me. In the past, I would have been very happy, but now, beneath that gentle facade, I felt his hidden rot, just feeling disgusted by the shallowness. I didn't expect that the knot that had been troubling me for so long would be untied at that moment. As soon as he left, I got up. To welcome Linda, the new mistress of the house, there were plenty of women's products in the room. I filled the bathtub, which could accommodate several people, with water and essential oils, and immersed myself in it. I realized I wasn't the destined main character for Steve, but the disposable female supporting role he used. After being used up, the outcome was clear. But I refused to accept it. Why me? What did I do wrong? Steve relied on me liking him to use me. How dare he do that? I was so absorbed in my thoughts that I didn't notice the door being forcefully pushed open until someone entered. Our eyes met, my breath caught. Even though I was submerged in water, it was clear. Eric disregarded my embarrassment, strode over, and lifted me out of the water. "What are you doing?" I angrily pounded him. "Put me down." His chest heaved heavily, his voice tinged with worry. "You scared me. I was stunned." He had already carried me out. Even though Eric and I should have done things that night we married, it was when I wasn't in my right mind. At this moment, I just felt ashamed and wanted to bite him. Taking advantage of his momentary relaxation, I rolled into the beddings in a flash, staring at him with cautious eyes. "Eric, we need to talk." After several days and various experiences, I had also come to terms with everything. And I felt it was necessary for us to communicate properly. "Okay, go over there." He noticed my wariness and reluctantly walked away in the direction I pointed at. Eric's clothes were mostly wet, his white shirt clinging tightly to his body, giving him a slightly restrained and beautiful look. Just a glance, and I quickly looked away. So awkward. After a while, I finally spoke. "Eric, I don't understand how our beautiful wedding turned into this. Honestly, I've loved Steve for so many years, and this outcome has left me desperate and broken. Thankfully, you were there for me these days, or else I wouldn't have been able to cope. But our relationship was wrong from the start, and I don't want to hold you back, so, do you still want to marry Steve?" Eric interrupted me, meeting my uncertain gaze. I shook my head honestly. "No, it's impossible between us." "What about you, Eric? Have you forgotten about Linda?" Even though my mistakes couldn't be undone, I was stepping back. "You and Linda still have a chance. Do you think Steve will give me that chance?" He replied with a question. I realized he had seen through Steve's intentions long ago. I thought about it seriously. Indeed, if Steve wanted the Whites, he certainly wouldn't give up the great assistance from Linda's family. Their dominance in the business world over the past few years was formidable, something the declining Smiths couldn't compare to. Not long after Eric took over the Song family, Steve joined them. If he united with the Tien family to deal with Eric, I couldn't predict the outcome. Looking at Eric bowing his head in helplessness, I felt a compassionate bond with him as fellow forsaken souls. So, can I help somehow? Surprisingly, without hesitation, he replied, "Yes." I was puzzled. How? Keep being my wife. Help me deal with Steve? Initially, I wanted to say I didn't have that much influence over Steve. But realizing Steve's cunning schemes, a surge of hatred rose in me. Didn't Steve want the Whites? Okay, then I won't let him have it his way. "Let's do it, I'll help you." The next day, Eric and I came downstairs together. At the sight of me, Eric's mother's eyes welled up with tears. His father and grandfather showed expressions of relief. They thought I had finally accepted the reality. And indeed I had. After breakfast, I brought up the topic myself. Eric's mother didn't agree, but eventually had to divulge that Steve was at the hospital with Linda. She tried to change the subject, but I insisted on going to the hospital to visit Linda. "You're still a bit weak, rest at home first." Eric disagreed. His mother agreed. Yes, Linda is fine now. You should take care of your own health first. I knew they had concerns, but this time, I had a reason to go. Eric couldn't resist me and had to accompany me. We arrived at a well-appointed private hospital. He led me familiarly up to the 10th floor, through a long corridor, and stopped outside a room. The whole floor was quiet, indicating that one needed a certain background to be a resident here. Before entering, Eric tried to hold my hand, but I avoided it. As I looked up, I saw depth hidden in his eyes. I looked away, pushing the door open without hesitation. Inside the room, two people were kissing passionately, too engrossed to notice us outside. I just stood there, watching with unblinking eyes, feeling a twinge in my heart, but it was already so much better than before. In the next moment, everything went dark. It was Eric's hand. He wanted to pull me away, but I stood my ground until I heard Linda sobbing. "Steve, don't do this, there's someone here." Then came a flurry of high-pitched rustling sounds. As the covering hand moved away, the scene in front of me had drastically changed. Linda lay on the hospital bed. Steve stood at the foot of the bed. "Eric, Kellen, why are you here?" Oblivious to the awkwardness in the air, I walked closer to the bed. I came to see Linda. Linda's forehead was bandaged, concealing any injury, but her lips were a vivid scarlet, piercing my eyes painfully. Perhaps my gaze was too direct. Linda blushed and shot Steve a glare. Publicly displaying affection like that, it really was sickeningly sweet. I felt more and more suffocated in my heart. "Kellen, don't misunderstand." Linda's explanation was very weak. To me, it didn't seem sincere, more like provocation. "Misunderstand what?" "I find it amusing. Did you and Steve not kiss?" I never expected to be so straightforward. Both Steve and Linda's faces turned ugly. Linda, with a pale face, timidly said, "Kellen, I'm sorry." I comforted her with a smile. "What did you do that you need to apologize for?" Her face pale, eyes filled with tears, she looked toward Steve for help. "Kellen." Steve reprimanded, "Linda is innocent. Any dissatisfaction you have should be directed at me." Before I could react, I heard, "Steve, she's your sister-in-law. I hope you get your attitude straight." Eric's voice was not loud, but firm. A warm feeling flooded my heart. I have to admit, being protected feels good, brother. Steve didn't dare to confront Eric directly. Eric's gaze was sharp. "You better remember that. Having a strong support is truly different." Facing Steve's questioning look, I didn't dodge. I asked, "Steve, what did I say to make you so angry? And, did I say anything wrong?" Linda pretending to be weak, I could ignore, but if she continues targeting me, I might start to dislike her. "I don't understand. I thought she liked Eric. Now she's targeting me openly and indirectly. Does she want Steve instead?" Seeing Steve stunned, I continued. "I came here today sincerely, even though I look at Linda. I don't know what you are afraid of. But I have to say, marriage is not child's play. If you have decided to make a mistake, so be it. I respect your choice. At the same time, I will take care of my marriage with Eric. But I have to remind you, I always abide by the saying, I don't offend others, but I won't be offended for no reason." Opening the door at that moment, I did consider giving up. Now, I've changed my mind. Steve and Linda can be together, but they shouldn't step on mine and Eric's pain to reach happiness. Standing up, I walked to Eric's side, wrapping my arm around him, looking at Linda. "You said something wrong. You haven't done anything to apologize for to me. On the contrary, I have to thank you for letting me have such an excellent Eric." Seeing her eyes turn red, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. Looking at Steve, I added, "Eric is right. From now on, please address me as sister-in-law." Facing Eric, whose emotions were unclear, I couldn't help but lower my voice. "Let's go." Seeing Eric retract his arm, I felt a bit awkward. But the next moment, he put his arm around my waist, asserting his dominance by hugging me as we left. Exiting the ward, still feeling stiff, I was about to leave Eric's embrace when he tightened his grip on my waist, leaning in to whisper, "He's watching." I endured it until we were outside the hospital before making my escape. The driver opened the car door for us, and we sat in the back seat. I felt like Eric was watching me, but I didn't dare to confirm if he was upset because of consoling Linda. "Do you need me to accompany you to the Smiths?" I was taken aback, realizing that in our current relationship, I needed to explain things to my parents. "Okay." After Eric briefly instructed the driver, the car fell silent. The journey seemed long, and I turned to look out the window, feeling Eric's hand suddenly grasp mine. I looked at Eric in surprise, thinking, had he forgotten our relationship? Why was he touching me like this? "Eric, let go." I was about to get angry when he lowered his head and softly said, "Steve is watching." I planned to push his hand away, but I froze, and from a distance, it looked like I was caressing his chest. Then, he gently planted a kiss on my lips. "Kellen, don't be angry." He lifted me off the ground horizontally, saying, "I promise to help you only. Not to sell myself to you." Eric looked slightly hurt by my reaction. I found that I couldn't stand Eric's weakness more and more recently. But he wasn't like this before. "Kellen." Our gaze turned to the door that was knocked on. "Eric, Kellen." It was Eric's mother. I opened the door. Mom looked at Eric and said, "Linda has been discharged. Your dad wants you guys downstairs. Grandpa has something to say." I looked at Eric, and he seemed to understand everything. A few minutes later, all of us were sitting on both sides of the long table, with Grandpa at the head. Those who had been in power for a long time spoke with a natural authority, and their words carried weight. In summary, no matter what went wrong on the wedding day, since it's already wrong, just let it be wrong, quickly get your marriage certificate, and live a good life. Then Dad warned Eric and Steve, the gist of it being that the past is like smoke in the wind, and from now on, they must treat their wives well. I sneakily looked at everyone present, ignoring Steve's questioning expression, and quickly shifted my gaze away. After it was over, Dad called Eric alone to the study. I had already intended to avoid Eric, but now that Steve and Linda were back, I definitely didn't want to stay here any longer. I thought of going out for some fresh air. Just as I stepped out of the door, someone dragged me to a secluded corner. "What are you doing?" I shook off Steve's hand. Steve was displeased with my actions, and with a grim expression, he stepped closer to me. "What are you doing? What's going on between you and Eric?" I didn't know if his questioning was out of concern for me or worry that I would escape his control. But regardless, I didn't want to tell him the truth. "Steve, don't forget I'm your sister-in-law now. What does it matter to you what happens between me and Eric?" Steve's expression darkened even more, his eyes staring at me intently, as if trying to figure something out. "Kellen, are you planning to betray me?" Angered, I laughed. "Steve, I can't bear the idea of betraying someone. I made it clear at the hospital that day I won't meddle in your affairs with Linda, and you have no say in me and Eric's affairs." As I prepared to leave, he unexpectedly embraced me from behind. I tensed up, trying to break free, but couldn't. "Steve, let go." Instead of releasing me, he drew closer to my neck, his breath almost touching me. Gathering all my strength, I prepared to strike him. However, before I could act, someone beat me to it and knocked him down. "Steve, are you out of your mind?" Eric, with red eyes and a fierce determination, was a far cry from his usual composed self. Steve was about to fall and nearly brought me down with him, but luckily, Eric caught me in time. He didn't let go immediately, but instead nuzzled my neck affectionately before pulling me behind him. Steve wiped his mouth and got up from the ground. He looked at Eric with a hint of hostility, but he didn't make any further moves. This was because Linda had also arrived. "Steve, what's going on?" She hurried to Steve, checked his wounds with concern, then glanced disapprovingly at me and Eric. "Eric, why did you hit someone?" Although it was a reprimand, the words sounded somewhat coquettish coming from her. I was curious to see how Eric would respond. "Linda, mind your words. Since you and Steve are married, you should call me brother. Just be careful with your words, Steve. There won't be a next time, otherwise it won't be just a punch." I was somewhat satisfied with Eric's response, and let him lead me away. Eric half-hugged and half-carried me back to the bedroom, closing the door and silencing my startled exclamation. He was too domineering, asserting absolute control over any resistance from me, and I could only submit to his whims. As I was about to suffocate, he allowed me a moment to catch my breath before continuing his relentless pursuit, and this went on for who knows how long. Eventually, I could no longer muster any resistance and simply accepted his advances. At last, he released my lips, breathing deeply near my neck. To my surprise, his first words were an apology. I was taken aback to see Eric, who was always cold and distant, crying. How unimaginable! The unattainable and aloof Eric from school had suddenly turned so fragile. Hey, Eric, calm down. And promise me you won't look at Steve anymore. It felt like dealing with a child, him setting conditions. Feeling the warm liquid drops on my neck, I agreed with him. Okay, you don't have to cry anymore. And you're not allowed to avoid me anymore. And just like that, Eric clung to me completely. Eric seemed like a different person. The abstinent and aloof godlike figure had descended and become a clingy dog, never leaving my side. If I dared to refuse him, he would cry, making me feel like a scoundrel. I knew that our situation was not right, but somehow I couldn't find the words to explain it and just let him cling to me. "Callan, would you accompany me to the office today?" He pestered me early in the morning, saying, "I feel anxious when I can't see you." Thinking about his recent antics, I confronted him. "Eric, have you forgotten what Steve might do?" He smiled, and his dark eyes focused on me. A sense of distance arose, and he once again became the superior Eric. I agreed half-heartedly, whether out of softness or something else, and ended up going to the office with him. The office building stood tall and impressive among the myriad skyscrapers. Having been living an idle life since graduation, occasionally writing novels, I had never experienced such a fast-paced lifestyle and was quite curious about the working class. Unfortunately, when Eric and I arrived, it was already past office hours. The car drove directly into the underground parking lot, and Eric led me to the highest floor via a dedicated elevator, without encountering the scenes I had imagined. Only as we entered his office did I see a few secretaries and personnel standing guard outside. They were all dressed in elite attire. Inside the CEO's office, I could see a large desk and a bookshelf that covered the entire wall, filled with a variety of books and documents. He led me to a mini desk opposite his and seated me comfortably. In front of me was the latest model of a certain brand of computer. "From now on, you can create here," he said softly in my ear, suggesting I could move around the various floors to experience working life. I was surprised by how he knew I was writing a novel and had considered it so thoughtfully. Despite his considerate gestures, I could only muster a feeble "thank you." He kissed my forehead tenderly and then went to his place. Shortly after, there was a knock on the door. His assistant had arrived to report on the day's schedule and arrangements. I lounged on the desk, stealing glances at Eric. Facing his male assistant, Eric resumed his usual cold demeanor, handling business matters efficiently and promptly. Despite wearing the same white shirt and black trousers, Eric exuded a unique charm, and as I watched him, I found myself strangely fascinated by his working demeanor. It took me a while to snap out of it, feeling incredulous. What's going on with me? Am I getting too immersed? I smacked my head and told myself not to get too carried away. Opening the computer, I logged into the serial update page and found a string of notifications awaiting me. I mustered my spirits and began updating my novel. With Eric and I busy at our respective ends without disturbing each other, my attention was diverted again when I caught a whiff of food. Eric had appeared at my desk at some point, holding a box of deliciously fragrant ribs. I couldn't help but salivate. "Take a break, eat, and then we'll continue?" he asked with a smile. I quickly stood up and followed him to a visitor's sofa where there were several dishes on the table. The logo indicated it was from a famous private kitchen, and without hesitating, I sat down and started eating. Eric watched me with a smile, occasionally picking up food for me. After these days, I had grown accustomed to his behavior and had nothing to say about it. But to some, it seemed like too much. "Eric, why is she here?" I raised my eyes to see his secretary and Linda, who had clearly forced her way in, standing awkwardly at the door. Seeing Linda's judgmental look, I lost my appetite and decided to leave first. "Where are you going?" Eric ignored Linda and instead grabbed my wrist. I stared at him with a puzzled look, saying, "I'm full now. You guys can talk." With one hand holding me, he gestured towards the secretary and Linda. "Wait until she finishes eating to discuss anything." "Get out," the secretary shrank back, pulling the stiff Linda away, closing the door behind them. I looked at Eric, dissatisfied that he was still holding my hand. "Eric," I said, "I'm full. Today was an accident, it won't happen again." His tone carried some appeasement. "Just eat a little more, okay?" With a heavy heart, I sat down and took a few bites, but I had no appetite. Eric could tell that something was bothering me, and he didn't force me. "Eric, I don't understand. Why is he so good to me? Trying to make Linda jealous? Or is it a retaliation because Linda chose Steve?" Eric's words left me even more confused. "It's okay not to understand. Just accept it," he said. As I stepped out, I immediately saw Linda standing with the secretary. She noticed me coming out and walked towards me. As we passed by each other, I noticed her eyes were red, probably feeling wronged. It should have been her closest person being nice to her, but he was treating another woman well without taking a stand. Just like how I saw Steve caring for her. There was a mix of excitement and sadness in my heart, not knowing why. She is still herself. Eric actually wanted me to stay and participate in his conversation with Linda. But I didn't want to. It seemed like Linda and I didn't get along well. Every word she said irritated me, and I wanted to argue back. I don't know if it was jealousy or something else, but I didn't want to become a person I hated. I wandered outside for a while. Even though it was lunchtime, there were still many people at their desks. I knew the company offered good benefits and had strong competitiveness. Everyone who managed to get in didn't want to be pushed out. During this time, many looks were directed at me, some curious, some skeptical. I guess they saw me as a new employee slacking off. I spent hours walking around, chatting with new employees who had recently joined the company and stopping to observe discussions in certain departments. This actually helped with my writing. I was engrossed in gossip at the pantry area when someone suddenly hugged me tightly from behind. I almost choked. "Why didn't you answer the phone?" Eric sounded a bit miffed. I felt embarrassed as I watched the people in the pantry quickly leave, not knowing whether to be angry or laughed. I patted my pockets and realized my phone must have been left in Eric's office. "I thought you had left already," I casually explained, but the company was quite big, so it took me some time to search. I gently pulled his arm off my waist and asked him to relax. Though people around us didn't openly stare, their eyes occasionally wandered over. Eric reluctantly let go of my hand and then held it tightly again, leading me away. It was awkward being the center of attention. Back in Eric's office, we both got back to work, and before I knew it, the day was coming to an end. The project that the boss had promised me to manage. "You're not suitable for it." "Eric, is it really that I'm not suitable, or is it your personal grudge? You didn't even fully understand the project and intended to collaborate with the other party. I don't care if you're impatient or have ulterior motives, but the company is not a battleground. I have to consider the bigger picture." Steve, in black clothes and a cold expression, confronted Eric, who was in a white shirt and black pants. The two tall men stood facing each other, creating a beautiful scene. Steve ended up defeated, leaving in anger. However, before he left, his gaze briefly swept over in my direction. I wondered if he had noticed me and if he would take his anger out on me. Eric didn't seem affected by the situation. He even invited me to join him for dinner at a high-end restaurant. After some consideration, I agreed. Since I couldn't avoid him, why not just have a meal? I thought to myself. Little did I know my luck was about to turn for the worst. The restaurant wasn't far from the office, so we decided to walk there. Upon entering, a waiter greeted us and led us to our table. The atmosphere was elegant, and being on the top floor, we could see the stars and the city's night view, which was quite impressive. As I glanced around, I saw Steve and Linda, who seemed to be getting cozy. I casually averted my eyes and continued forward. Unfortunately, our table ended up being right next to theirs. It felt like fate was playing a joke on me. Eric noticed my discomfort and asked if we should change seats. I hesitated. Technically, we didn't do anything wrong, so we shouldn't be the ones hiding. But I really didn't want their presence to ruin my appetite. "Let's switch," Eric communicated with the waiter, and we smoothly moved to another table. Once seated again, Eric ordered food and a bottle of red wine. The table was filled with a variety of dishes: caviar, vegetable soup, cold-cut steak, salmon, desserts, and more. Eric poured me a glass of red wine, and I awkwardly accepted it, feeling his strange gaze on me. "Is this our first time?" he asked in an even stranger tone. Remembering the curiosity killed the cat, I avoided engaging further and clinked my glass with his, taking a sip. After that, I kept my head down, eating silently without looking or listening to anything around me. Unintentionally, I ended up drinking the red wine like a beverage without realizing it. It wasn't until we were leaving that I noticed I seemed to be a bit tipsy. My mind was clear, but my steps were unsteady. Fortunately, Eric held me steady, preventing any embarrassing moments in public. When we got downstairs, the driver had already parked the car by the entrance. Eric helped me into the back seat and followed suit. As I leaned back, trying to shake off the wine's after effects, Eric gently laid me down on his lap and adjusted me into a comfortable position. I couldn't muster the strength to resist. I regretted not being more careful and ending up drinking too much. The following morning, I woke up in the room all by myself. Blushing, I looked at the marks on my body and fell into a moment of silent embarrassment. The first time was an accident, but what about this time? There was a note from Eric on the bedside table. "Remember to have breakfast when you wake up. I've gone to the office." The words were as strong and firm as he was. By the time I went downstairs, it was almost noon. I had no appetite, so I reluctantly drank a glass of milk and decided to go back to the room. "Kellen." Steve intercepted me at the staircase corner. His expression wasn't good, with visible dark circles under his eyes, and his gaze towards me was complex. Recalling the previous incident, I cautiously took a step back and started looking for someone I could seek help from. Kellen, I won't do things you don't like. I was rash last time. Can we talk about it? Seeing his genuine attitude, I hesitated but eventually agreed. We went to a small lounge on the second floor, a place where Eric discussed matters with close friends and was usually empty. I chose a seat further away from Steve and waited for him to speak up. Kellen, how did we end up like this? Steve's voice was soft, tinged with indescribable melancholy. Yes, how did we end up like this? I used to think that we would be the closest people in the world, but now, Kellen, can we still? No, we can't. I interrupted him. Initially, I had fantasies, but now I know very well that even if no one interferes, there is no way he and I could work out. Why? His eyes were red. After all these years of our relationship, how can you just change like this? I stared back at him incredulously. My voice involuntarily raised. I've changed? Who changed first? Who gave up on this relationship first? I didn't. You're the only person I've ever loved. Some people truly need to experience despair to see things clearly. In this moment, my heart suddenly became calm. Love that pinned me to the dust on our wedding night, love that promised to pamper another woman for a lifetime, love that flirted with other women. If that's the kind of love that pushes me down, let's not have it. Steve stood up emotionally. It's not like that, I was acting. I was doing it for our future. Steve, your poverty didn't make me despise you, but now, you disgust me. We have no future. From now on, I'm just your sister-in-law. What about you and Linda? I don't care. I didn't want to delve into these pointless discussions with him anymore. As I stood up to leave, he blocked my path. Kellen, no, you're my wife. Everything now is just temporary. I'll soon take over the Whites' power. Wait for me, don't give up on me. Seeing his panicked expression and desperate plea, my heart wasn't entirely unaffected, but I knew these were just temporary emotions. One day, I would completely let him go. No love, no hatred. Facing Steve's entanglement, I felt no joy, but rather a heavy sadness. For him, as well as for myself. It was clear that he had feelings for me. But when faced with interests, he could cut off that emotional connection without hesitation, even investing his emotions in Linda. How much of this distorted relationship was genuine and how much was pretense? My mom's appearance interrupted Steve's entanglement and allowed me to escape smoothly. I returned to my room and sat there until it was dark. Eric turned on the light, saw me sitting there, and embraced me. What happened? I didn't reply to him, but instead asked, how much longer until it's over? Who has upset you? Eric, I want to leave this place. Okay, we'll move out. I want to be alone. No, I don't trust you being alone. Seeing my state, Eric decided to take me away from the Whites' mansion that night. We went to an apartment where he used to live alone. The room was decorated mostly in cool colors, with black and white as the main theme. Eric showed me around the house. We can live here for now. You can change the layout and decoration of the house according to your preferences. There's another new residence in a nearby area that's bigger. We can move there later according to your taste. I couldn't muster up the energy to respond. Eric asked me to sit on the couch, turned on the TV for me, and tuned it to the variety show channel I used to like. Watch some TV first. I'll go cook. I hadn't eaten much all day, but I didn't feel hungry. Facing the tomato and egg noodles Eric made, I took a few bites and then left them untouched. Eric put me to bed and gently patted my back like comforting a child. Sleep now, everything will be okay when you wake up. His comfort worked, and soon I drifted off to sleep. From that day on, Eric took me everywhere he went. We ate, lived, and worked together. In the office, I often encountered Steve, but he couldn't say or do anything to me in front of Eric. But I could sense that the atmosphere between them was evolving, from initially calculating in secret to openly fighting for dominance. By all rights, whether in terms of age, status, or capability, the Whites should belong to Eric. Due to his father's favoritism, Eric received a large portion of the shares, while Steve, as his son, only got a meager share. But the grandfather, old in age but young in heart, held onto a portion of shares, which he promised to give to Steve. With Linda's family supporting Steve behind the scenes, he had the strength to compete. During this time, Eric remained gentle and caring towards me, but I could see that he was under a lot of pressure. As Eric's overtime hours became longer, there were times when I would fall asleep on the couch and he would still be working at his desk. I felt a pang of sympathy. At one point, he suggested that I go back home for a while so that he could focus more on work and less on taking care of me. Eric helped me pack my things and personally took me back home. Just before leaving, he gave me a few words of advice. My mom waited until he left, then asked me in confusion about the situation between us. I quickly explained that Eric had been too busy, and I didn't want him to be distracted by taking care of me, so I came back home for a while until he finished his busyness. My mom frowned at me. Then why don't you take care of him? You've moved out of the White's mansion just for him, and now he's worried you'll cut your hand while chopping vegetables or splatter oil while frying. You're spoiled by Eric. A month quickly passed. I had a comfortable time at home, but sometimes I would think of Eric. I didn't know how he was doing now. Since he had brought me back, we had talked on the phone twice and had 2 video calls. He mostly cared about me in the conversations, and I could see that he was exhausted, yet he hesitated to rest just to look at me a little longer. One day, I suddenly received a text message from Linda. It briefly informed me that Eric was in danger and asked me to hurry to a certain location. Not being foolish, I naturally asked Eric about the situation, but no matter how many times I called him, he didn't pick up. Feeling restless, I decided to go to the company. I had gone in and out of the same floor as Eric several times, and the front desk welcomed me with a smile and sent me up the elevator. No one in the secretary team knew where Eric was, only saying that he hadn't come in that day. Feeling anxious, I immediately took a car to the location Linda had informed me of. It was a hotel. When I entered the lobby, I saw Steve there, as if he knew I would come, and greeted me with a smile. I asked with a stern face, "Where's Eric? Do you want to see him?" His attitude seemed off, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. "What have you done to him?" Steve reached out to touch my head, but I stepped back to avoid him. Unbothered, he said, "Let's go, I'll take you to see him." I followed him into the elevator and out of the elevator. Throughout the journey, I was on high alert with him, but he seemed relaxed and open. Shortly after getting out of the elevator, we stopped in front of a room. "Kellen, after today, we'll go back to how we used to be." I was worried about Eric's safety and didn't have the time to think about what he meant. Seeing the room door was open, I rushed inside. The room was simple in layout, and I immediately saw Eric on the bed. His black shirt was torn and crumpled, his face was flushed, and his eyes were unfocused, indicating that he was unconscious. Even in that state, Linda, who had pounced on him, was pushed away unintentionally. Linda was now undressed, and Eric pushed her to the ground. Seeing me and Steve at the door, her expression turned sour. Witnessing the scene, I instantly understood Steve's intentions. He wanted Eric and Linda to have a relationship. I wanted to help, but was stopped by Steve, who pulled my hand back. He glared at Linda with disappointment. It hasn't happened yet. After all this time, how useless. He was about to lead me away when the police arrived just before Steve closed the door. I wasn't foolish. If Eric was in danger, would I have gone to the meeting alone? Naturally, I had called the police. As soon as I arrived, I sent my location to the police. Thankfully, they arrived in time and took Steve and Linda away. As for Eric, I had planned to take him to the hospital, but he realized that I wouldn't let go of him. In the end, we ended up in bed in Steve's room. It was a night of chaos. As I opened my eyes, I met a pair of tender eyes. Kellen. I didn't dare to look at Eric. After Eric explained the situation, I learned the whole story. Due to Steve's instigation, there was internal turmoil within the company, but Eric managed to regain control and hold on to the White's power. The shares promised to Steve by the grandfather were taken back. After Steve's defeat, he set up Eric with the whole scene I had seen earlier. I guess that Steve had made some agreement with Linda, such as swapping identities between the 4 of us. However, Eric chose to endure rather than cooperate, and the plan failed. After I called the police, Steve and Linda were taken away, and this time they would face legal consequences. With just a phone call from my mom, Eric and I returned to the White's mansion. In the living room, the 3 of them sat in silence, the atmosphere heavy. When they saw us, my mom came up and her eyes were red, indicating she had cried before. She was a kind person who couldn't match Eric's status, but still got along well with him. However, Steve sought to seize control of the Whites and harm his own son. After the grandfather learned about the situation that day, I truthfully recounted what had happened. Afterwards, the old man sighed and didn't say anything, only handing over a share transfer document to Eric. Everything settled down, and it was finally over. Leaving the mansion, Eric took me to a new residence. I mentioned this place to you before. What style do you like? I'll have someone design it. We went through the garden, pool, living room, and bedrooms one by one. He envisioned our future together, discussing the purposes of each room and asking me which bedroom I'd like to stay in. In that moment, my heart fluttered, but I felt slightly lost about the future. Would we have a future together? Eric, give me some time, I said, meeting his concerned gaze. These days, I could sense his feelings for me, but I didn't dare to gamble. I didn't know if there would be another Steve, another betrayal, or if I'd be able to get through it. Eric, give me some time. 7 Eric hugged me tightly and planted a warm kiss on my forehead before leading me up to the rooftop. Callan, I'm planning to build a glass conservatory here and add a hanging chair over there. When it gets cold, you can sit here to write, relax, and bask in the sun. What do you think? Listening to Eric's plans, I could almost envision the cozy scene and found myself nodding involuntarily. Excitedly, Eric said, "Great, I'll have someone come to renovate it tomorrow." That afternoon, I accompanied Eric to the company. Perhaps due to the change in my mood, I felt uneasy throughout the day. To avoid awkwardness, I stayed in Eric's office the whole afternoon without going anywhere. That night, back at the apartment, I told Eric, I think I'll sleep in the guest room for now." Eric's face darkened, and he whispered, "I'll go then. The guest room has been empty for a long time. I'll tidy it up. You can rest in the bedroom first." I was surprised that he agreed, without insisting on sharing the same room. The beginning between us was indeed rough, not because I didn't want to, but because I lacked confidence. The next day, walking out of the bedroom, I found Eric sitting on the sofa, still in the same clothes from yesterday, looking disheveled and tired. As I approached him, I asked, "Eric, you didn't come back to the room last night?" He gave me a reassuring smile and replied, "I did, couldn't sleep well, so I got up to watch TV for a while." That was more than just a while. I didn't know what to say at that moment. His state was undoubtedly due to me, but I couldn't bring myself to ask him to return to the master bedroom. The foundation of trust one held onto was continuously crumbling under Eric's influence. Days passed, and I soon realized I was pregnant. For the past few days, I felt some discomfort in my stomach, lost my appetite, and couldn't eat much, causing Eric to worry. He had intended to accompany me to the hospital for a checkup, but a sudden visit from an overseas business partner required his attention. After I reassured him, he reluctantly agreed for me to go for the examination alone. The results revealed the presence of another life within me. What should I do? Looking at the image of that tiny being, my heart softened completely. I discreetly tucked the ultrasound report into my bag and accepted the car Eric sent for me, driving directly to the company. At noon, Eric hurriedly approached me, asking about the examination results. I flashed him a pre-adjusted smile and said, "It's fine, don't worry. The doctor said I don't even need to take any medication." He seemed skeptical and questioned the reliability of the doctor. Insisting on further examination at a different hospital, I feared that my secret would be exposed if he took me there. I had to pretend to be irritated, saying, "Eric, it's just a stomach issue. I'll be fine with some dietary precautions. Can you stop acting like I'm about to die?" Before I could finish, I saw him reddening with tears in his eyes. "Fine, I'm hungry. Let's go eat." And so, he took me to a private restaurant specializing in stomach-friendly cuisine. Upon entering the restaurant, Eric bumped into a few friends who insisted he join them. Eric glanced at me, declined their invitation, and explained that I wasn't feeling well. One of his friends expressed dissatisfaction, while another tried to smooth things over, insisting they should all get to know me. Despite Eric's reluctance, I reassured him, and we entered the private dining area where everyone settled down. During the meal, a young man teased Eric, joking about the fall of the aloof male god. Before he could finish, Eric's stern gaze silenced him. Another person quickly intervened, trying to lighten the mood, while Eric, near me, spoke softly but assertively, "Callan, if you're not feeling well, we can leave. Don't worry, you are the most important person to me here." The room fell silent, with everyone looking at each other in disbelief. The person who teased Eric earlier stood up, apologized profusely to me, acknowledging his mistake. It seemed that no woman at our school could get close to Eric. Watching their amusing antics, I couldn't help but burst into laughter. Subsequently, the group started to behave warmly and endearingly towards me. By the end of the meal, I was left laughing until my stomach ached. As we bid farewell to everyone, their warm regards caused Eric to show signs of jealousy. Eric always expressed his feelings through his actions, and I decided to be brave once more. That night, I called Eric to the master bedroom and handed him the ultrasound report. He stared at it as if studying some complex puzzle, eventually dumbfoundedly asking me, "Is this our child?" I nodded with a smile. He looked at me, cheeks reddening with tears welling up, as if wanting to embrace me, but hesitating. That night, despite staying in the master bedroom, he refrained from getting too close due to his concern for the baby inside me. As I had made up my mind to share a lifetime with him, I was deeply moved and gladly accepted when he proposed. On a beautiful day with great weather, we obtained our marriage certificate. Eric carefully kept the 2 marriage certificates like treasures, sighing, "Finally, everything is official." I couldn't help but chuckle. This man, he loved me and would continue to love me.